Hi everyone, welcome to a short video introduction on the history and legacy of Indigenous residential schools in Canada. This lesson also explains how Gord Downie, Canada's poet laureate and lead singer of the iconic Canadian band The Tragically Hip, is hoping in his final days to spark reconciliation between Canada's people, its government, and Canada's Indigenous peoples. The Secret Path is a combination graphic novel illustrated by Jeff Lemire, 10-song original album by Gord Downie, a short story written by famed Métis author and advocate Joseph Boyden, and a 1-hour animated film. The Secret Path is based upon the tragic life of Chanie Wenjack of Martin Falls First Nation, who ran away from Cecilia Jeffrey Residential School outside of Kenora, Ontario in 1966, and was reported by Maclean's magazine in 1967. Upon reading the original article, Downie was struck by how little had changed for Canada's First Nations. Once he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, an incurable brain cancer, he used his final days to advocate for reconciliation and repairing the relationship between Canada's Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples and Canada's government, which still maintains a paternalistic and colonial relationship over them via the Indian Act of 1876. On August 20th, 2016, during the Canada-wide Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's broadcast of the Tragically Hip's final live concert in their hometown of Kingston, Ontario, lead singer Downie made a public appeal to Canada's new Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to fulfill his election promise to change the relationship between the Canadian government and Canada's First Nations to help create a better identity. After the Tragically Hip final tour wrapped up, Downie focused on promoting his next project, The Secret Path, based on the life of Chanie Wenjack. He traveled to Martin Falls First Nation and met with Sister Pearl and the remainder of the Wenjack family to finish filming a documentary about the story he was sharing with Canada to create a dialogue of reconciliation. In 1800, there were 296 Indigenous languages spoken in North America, and now 31 of those are extinct. Others are on the verge of extinction, with only a handful of speakers remaining as a result of residential school policies which disallowed speaking native language. Historical trends tell us a lot about how people and societies might react to different events. One major event stands out in European history as being a critical turning point. This was the Black Plague. That event from 1346 to 1350 killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire population of Western Europe. The results led to the Protestant Reformation, the growth of capitalism and a wage economy, individual rights and freedoms, humanism, and modern philosophy. So what is the impact upon a populace in which 90 to 93% of all of the Indigenous peoples of Canada and the United States were wiped out as a result of illness and assimilationist policies between 1600 and 1875? What is the cultural impact upon these peoples if one considers the lasting impact of the Black Death 7 centuries ago? Culture was destroyed, languages lost, villages were eradicated, oral histories were lost as elders died, generations of grief, loss of religion were some of the main factors in what became known as the cultural genocide in Canada. When contact with Europeans occurred, Indigenous peoples' lifestyles, economy, social lives, and oral storytelling traditions changed. In a very telling fashion, the Canadian government policies were made clear in the words of Duncan Campbell Scott, the Superintendent for Indian Affairs in 1920, when he said, "The happiest future for the Indian race is absorption into the general population, and this is the object of the policy of our government. The great forces of intermarriage and education will finally overcome the lingering races of native custom and tradition." The assimilationist policies of the Canadian government's goal was clear through the Indian residential school system. In 1876, the Indian Act not only made all First Nations wards of the state and forced them to attend residential schools. Over 130 schools were created in which 160,000 children attended from 1876 to 1996, when the final school was closed. Abuses in the schools were well known and documented as early as 1902. A $1.9 billion compensation package was announced in 2007, of which 90% of legal claims by the 80,000 survivors documented sexual abuse, among others. Furthermore, the Canadian government authorized health and malnourishment experiments that are well documented in federal archives on students in some of the schools in the 1940s and 50s. Schools were poorly constructed with limited funds for maintenance, which created further health and safety issues for students. The insufficient funding occurs to this day, with First Nation students receiving approximately half the funding that non-Indigenous students receive as an educational grant. Students during the day were given 2 to 3 hours of instruction in the morning of math and English, but domestic skills such as cooking and sewing for girls and farm chores for boys were considered far more valuable skills. When combined with, up until 1969, the mandatory religion classes and prayer classes, this meant for rather long days for the students with limited opportunity for further education. The ripple effects of the residential school system are many. Fear of the white man's education system and fear of sending children out of the community for school are two of the most significant. In Thunder Bay, 7 students have died in the last decade while boarding and attending high school. This triggered a coroner's inquest during most of 2016. Other issues regarding from the intergenerational trauma of the Indian Act include poverty, high suicide rates, unrecognized treaty rights, fundamental human rights being unrecognized, and educational underfunding, furthering all the previously mentioned issues. Today, organizations such as the Assembly of First Nations are fighting for housing, hunting and fishing rights, land rights, clean water, and other social justice issues. In the spring of 2016, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada issued a call for 94 recommendations to be adopted to heal the relationship between the peoples of Canada, the Canadian government, and Canada's First Nations. They're seeking spiritual healing, treatment, counseling. They're learning their language, culture, and traditional heritage in order to recover from the traumatic abuses of the residential school system. The story of Chani Wenjack is a sad one. He attended Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School in Kenora, Ontario, and this is what it looked like at the time. He ran away in 1966 and died 5 days later trying to trek over 600 kilometers to his family's home in what is now known as Martin Falls First Nation, at that time known as Ogoki Post. Gord Downey's project, The Secret Path, began in 2013, took on a new urgency for the artist after he was diagnosed with incurable brain cancer in early of 2016. For more information, please see the website below or search thesecretpath.ca. Additional teaching and learning resources will follow in later lessons relating to this project and how he and a few other Canadian artists such as Jeff Lemire and Joseph Boyden are attempting to create a dialogue into reconciliation between two disparate cultures that share a tragic history. In conclusion, please complete the poll on this slide and share one fact that you've learned from this presentation about the residential school system or Indigenous peoples of Canada and explain why you think this fact is significant. Thank you very much for your time, and please see The Secret Path and read the resources. Watch the 1-hour movie on The Secret Path that is on the website. Thank you.